On the night of July 18, 1954, a 59-year-old man lies in his bunk at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. Outside, the Kansas heat presses against the stone walls. Inside his cell, George Kelly Barnes clutches his chest as his heart gives out. 21 years earlier, newspapers had called him the most dangerous man in America. Edgar Hoover himself had sworn to catch the dirty yellow rat who kidnapped one of Oklahoma's wealthiest men. The FBI had plastered his face on wanted posters from coast to coast, warning citizens about the expert machine gunner who showed no mercy. But on this night, Machine Gun Kelly dies alone. No family rushes to claim his body. No loved ones gather to mourn. His first wife had remarried decades ago. His two sons had changed their names to escape the shadow of his crimes. His second wife sits in a prison cell hundreds of miles away. The warden calls the only person who might care. Robert Boss Shannon, the stepfather of Kelly's imprisoned wife, agrees to bury him in a small Texas cemetery. The headstone would bear only a name and a year. No titles, no dates, no epitaph for the man the press had once called Public Enemy Number 1. But this is not really the story of Machine Gun Kelly. This is the story of what happened to the people he left behind. His two sons from his first marriage would spend their entire lives running from his name. One would never forgive him for the violence and the beatings. The other would remain loyal enough to write a book defending his father's memory. His second wife, Catherine, would serve 25 years in prison before emerging into a world that had forgotten her. His stepdaughter, Pauline, would receive an education paid for by the very man her family had kidnapped. This is what happened to Machine Gun Kelly's family after he died in prison, and why their story reveals how the sins of one man can echo through generations, long after the cell doors close. If you are fascinated by the hidden stories of America's most notorious criminals, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You will not want to miss what comes next. George Kelly Barnes was born into a world of comfort and promise. His father worked as an insurance executive in Memphis, Tennessee. His mother, Elizabeth, came from respectable Irish stock. The family lived in a nice neighborhood. Young George attended Central High School, where his classmates remembered him as quiet and charming. He had a paper route. He worked as a caddy at a local golf club. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would become one of America's most wanted criminals. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. George despised his father for his marital affairs. He blamed the old man's philandering for breaking his mother's heart. When Elizabeth Kelly Barnes died while George was still in high school, the young man's resentment turned to hatred. He began extorting his father for money and car privileges, threatening to expose his secrets. In 1917, George enrolled at Mississippi A&M to study agriculture. His college career lasted less than one semester. He accumulated 55 demerits for various infractions. His highest grade was a C+ in physical hygiene. He received a 0 in woodwork. By January 1918, he had dropped out and returned to Memphis with nothing to show for his time, but a taste for trouble. It was during this period that George met Geneva Ramsey. She was the daughter of a successful businessman who built levees and railroads in the Mississippi River Valley. Her father had heard about Barnes and his reputation. He forbade his daughter from seeing the young man. But Geneva was taken by George's charm. On a drive through Mississippi, he convinced her to elope. They married in October 1919. She was 18. He was 19. For a brief moment, it seemed like George Barnes might turn his life around. His new father-in-law gave him a job in his construction company. The two men developed a mutual respect. Years later, while sitting in Alcatraz, Kelly would tell his son that if George Ramsey had been his real father, his life would have been entirely different. But fate had other plans. In the mid-1920s, George Ramsey was killed in a dynamite explosion at a work site. The death devastated the young couple and sent Barnes into a downward spiral. Geneva's mother sold the business and tried to help. A used car dealership failed. A goat farm failed. Barnes tried selling insurance with help from his own father. That failed too. Discouraged and desperate, he turned back to the one thing that had ever made him money: bootlegging. By this time, George and Geneva had a son. They called him George Jr., but his nickname was Sonny. Barnes was not a good father. He paid little attention to his firstborn. His drinking increased, and so did the violence. During one heated argument, Barnes picked up his young son and hurled him across the room. Sonny would grow up fearing and resenting his father. He would never forgive him. Geneva suffered one miscarriage before giving birth to a second son, Bruce. Something about this child was different for Barnes. He doted on Bruce, showing obvious favoritism in front of Sonny. The contrast between how he treated his two boys would shape both of their lives forever. As Barnes sank deeper into bootlegging, his abuse of Geneva and the children grew worse. She left him several times, but always returned. Finally, Barnes moved to Kansas City and got a job as a checker at a grocery store. He convinced Geneva to give him one more chance. She packed up the boys and joined him. Within weeks, she discovered he was stealing from the store. After another violent argument, Geneva packed up the family and returned to Memphis for good. She filed for divorce. To serve him the papers, she had to put a notice in the newspaper. She had no idea where to find him. George Barnes was now completely on his own. He dropped the name Barnes to protect his family from embarrassment and began calling himself George R. Kelly. He drifted west, picking up bootlegging jobs and small crimes. In 1928, federal agents caught him smuggling liquor onto an Indian reservation. He was sentenced to 3 years at Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas. It was there, behind bars, that George Kelly made the connections that would transform him from a small-time bootlegger into a notorious gangster. He befriended bank robbers like Charlie Harmon and Francis Keating. He learned the tricks of the trade from men who had pulled off major heists. When he was released early for good behavior in 1930, Kelly was ready to move up in the criminal world. He traveled to Oklahoma City and fell in with a bootlegger named Little Steve Anderson. There he met the woman who would change everything, Catherine Thorne. Catherine was no innocent bystander. Born Cleo Laramie Brooks in Saltillo, Mississippi in 1904, she had changed her name because she thought Catherine sounded more elegant. By the time she met Kelly, she had already been married 3 times. Her first husband was a laborer's son she married at 14. She gave birth to a daughter named Pauline in 1919 before divorcing him. Her second marriage lasted only months. Her third husband, a bootlegger named Charlie Thorne, was found shot to death with a perfectly typed suicide note beside him. The suspicious detail was that Charlie Thorne was illiterate. No charges were ever filed. Catherine was running with Anderson when Kelly arrived in Oklahoma City. She saw something in the tall, charming bootlegger, or perhaps she saw someone she could mold. She left Anderson and ran off with Kelly, taking Anderson's Cadillac and his prized English bulldog with them. They married in Minneapolis in September 1930. What happened next would become the stuff of gangster legend. Catherine bought Kelly a Thompson submachine gun. She made him practice with it in the countryside, even though he hated the noise and had little interest in weapons. She handed out spent shell casings to underworld contacts as souvenirs from her husband's supposed crimes. She spread rumors that he had been a machine gunner in World War I and could write his name in lead. The truth was that Kelly had avoided military service with a medical deferment and was a mediocre shot at best. But the nickname Machine Gun Kelly took hold. Throughout the early 1930s, the Kellys pulled bank robberies across Texas, Oklahoma, and Washington state. They lived lavishly, spending their money on cars, jewelry, and furs. But Catherine wanted more. She wanted the big time. In the summer of 1933, she found the perfect target. Charles F. Urschel was one of the wealthiest men in Oklahoma. He had married into oil money and with his second wife, Berenice, built a financial empire. On the night of July 22, 1933, Urschel and his wife were playing bridge with friends on the screened porch of their Oklahoma City mansion. Just after 11 p.m., 2 armed men burst through the door. One carried a machine gun. The other held a pistol. Kelly demanded, "Which one of you is Urschel?" When neither man answered, he grabbed both of them. "We'll take them both." The kidnappers forced Charles Urschel and his friend Walter Jarrett into a waiting car. Outside the city, they checked wallets to identify their target. Jarrett was robbed of $51 and left on the side of the road. Urschel was blindfolded and driven through the night to a ranch in Paradise, Texas, owned by Catherine's mother, Ora, and stepfather, boss Shannon. For 9 days, Urschel was held captive, but the oil man was no ordinary victim. Despite being blindfolded, he used every sense available to gather information. He memorized the sounds of farm animals. He noted the mineral taste of the well water. He counted his footsteps. He listened for patterns. Twice each day, he heard an airplane fly overhead. He asked his captors what time it was. The plane passed at 9:45 in the morning and 5:45 in the evening. He deliberately left his fingerprints on every surface he could reach. On July 30th, 1933, the ransom was paid, $200,000 in marked bills, the largest ransom ever demanded up to that time. The next day, Urschel was released near Norman, Oklahoma. He walked into a restaurant and called for a cab. Within hours, he was sitting with FBI agents, providing a detailed account of everything he had observed. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover took personal charge of the case. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping had occurred just a year earlier, and the new Lindbergh law made kidnapping a federal offense punishable by death. Hoover needed a high-profile win. Using Urschel's remarkable observations, agents matched the airplane schedule to an American Airways flight between Fort Worth and Amarillo. The flight path passed directly over Paradise, Texas. On August 12, 1933, FBI agents raided the Shannon Ranch. They arrested boss Shannon, his wife Ora, and their son Armand. They also captured Harvey Bailey, an escaped bank robber who happened to be hiding at the ranch. Bailey had $700 of the marked ransom money in his pocket. Urschel himself accompanied the agents and identified the houses where he had been held. His fingerprints were found exactly where he said he had left them, but the Kellys were gone. For weeks, they moved across the country, spending ransom money and staying one step ahead of the law. They dyed their hair to change their appearance. They bounced between Chicago, Minneapolis, and Memphis. The FBI tracked the marked bills as they surfaced in different cities. The dragnet was closing. On September 26, 1933, the Kellys were hiding in the Memphis home of a family friend named John Tichenor. They had consumed 6 quarts of gin the night before. In the early morning hours, Memphis police and FBI agents surrounded the house. When they burst through the door, Kelly was standing in his pajamas, hungover, and holding a pistol. Catherine was still asleep in bed. The FBI later claimed that Kelly shouted the famous words, "Don't shoot, G-men." The phrase supposedly coined a new nickname for federal agents. But the earliest FBI accounts of the arrest tell a different story. Kelly simply raised his hands and said nothing. The legend, like so much of Machine Gun Kelly's reputation, was more myth than reality. The Kellys were flown to Oklahoma City for trial. The proceedings became a media sensation. Newsreel cameras were allowed in the courtroom for one of the first filmed federal trials in American history. Catherine appeared in fashionable dresses, hats, and high heels. She fluffed her hair and smiled for the cameras. George looked sullen and uncomfortable. On October 12, 1933, both were convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. In total, 21 people were convicted for their roles in the Urschel kidnapping. 6 received life sentences. Boss Shannon was sentenced to 25 years. Ora Shannon, Catherine's mother, received life alongside her daughter. The era of Machine Gun Kelly had ended. The consequences for his family were just beginning. George Kelly was sent first to Leavenworth, then transferred to Alcatraz in August 1934, after boasting that he would escape and free his wife by Christmas. He arrived at the island prison as inmate number 117, one of the first prisoners at the notorious facility. Al Capone was already there, so was his kidnapping partner Albert Bates. But the fearsome Machine Gun Kelly that Catherine had created did not exist behind bars. Fellow inmates called him Pop Gun Kelly because of his exaggerated tall tales. Warden James Johnston considered him a model prisoner. He worked in the prison laundry and later in the industry's office. He served as an altar boy in the chapel. He caused no trouble. Kelly would spend 17 years on Alcatraz. Letters from family members would sometimes make him depressed. He wrote regularly to those who still cared about him. He expressed remorse for his crimes and always felt that Catherine and the others had been treated too harshly. In 1951, he was quietly transferred back to Leavenworth. 3 years later, on his 59th birthday, his heart gave out. When word reached prison officials that Kelly had died, they contacted his family, but no one came forward to claim the body. His father had passed away years earlier. His first wife, Geneva, had remarried twice and wanted nothing to do with him. His sons had changed their names to escape the stigma. The body remained unclaimed. Boss Shannon, who had been pardoned by President Roosevelt in 1944 because of ill health, agreed to arrange the burial. Kelly was laid to rest in Cottondale Cemetery in Wise County, Texas, in the Shannon family plot. The headstone simply reads, George B. Kelly, 1954. Even his name was misspelled. But this protected life that Kelly's family had tried to build for themselves had a fatal weakness. The name Machine Gun Kelly would follow them no matter how far they ran. Geneva Ramsey had divorced George Barnes in the mid-1920s and told reporters after his arrest that she had left him because he was running in bad company. She had no idea that her ex-husband had become the notorious Machine Gun Kelly until FBI agents came knocking in 1933. By then, she had remarried a man named Frank Trimbach. She would later divorce Trimbach and marry again, becoming Geneva Williams. She lived a quiet life in Memphis, raising her 2 sons far from the spotlight. She died in August 1997 at the age of 95. Her ashes were buried next to her parents in Elmwood Cemetery. She had outlived her infamous first husband by 43 years. Her 2 sons took drastically different paths in dealing with their father's legacy. George Ramsey Barnes Jr., the boy his father had called Sonny, never forgave the abuse he suffered as a child. He remembered being thrown across the room. He remembered watching his father beat his mother. He remembered the favoritism shown to his younger brother. Sonny legally changed his last name to Trimbach, taking the name of his stepfather. He wanted nothing to do with George Kelly Barnes or the name Machine Gun Kelly. He spent his entire life refusing to discuss his father publicly. He died in 1989, having successfully distanced himself from the gangster legacy. Bruce Barnes took a different approach. Unlike his older brother, Bruce remembered a father who doted on him. He remembered being the favorite. Years later, he would recall that his father told him from Alcatraz that if Granddad Ramsey had been his real father, his life would have been entirely different. Bruce remained loyal to his father's memory. In 1991, Bruce Barnes published a book titled Machine Gun Kelly: To Right a Wrong. The 272-page paperback was an attempt to humanize the man the media had turned into a monster. Bruce drew heavily on his mother Geneva's memories of her marriage to George Barnes. The book focused on Kelly's early years, his troubled childhood, his failed attempts at legitimate work, and the positive influence of his father-in-law George Ramsey. Critics noted that the book was not well organized and contained some inaccuracies about his father's criminal career. But Bruce's goal was never to write a definitive history. He wanted to show the world that his father was more than a headline. The book includes photographs and personal details that appear nowhere else. Bruce gave credit to his mother in the acknowledgments for her unfaltering memory of those 6 years she spent married to the man who became Machine Gun Kelly. Bruce Barnes changed his last name to Trimbach like his brother, but he never abandoned his father's memory. He gave interviews to researchers studying Depression-era gangsters. He signed copies of his book for collectors. He lived long enough to see his father become a figure of historical curiosity rather than public terror. The exact date of Bruce's death is not well documented in public records, but his book remains the only first-hand family account of Machine Gun Kelly's life. While George Kelly's sons tried to escape his shadow, his second wife Catherine faced a different kind of punishment. She and her mother, Ora Shannon, were sent to a federal women's correctional facility in West Virginia. Mother and daughter would spend 25 years together behind bars. Catherine had always believed she would get out. During the trial, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was simply a victim of her marriage to a gangster. Her lawyers argued that the government's case against her rested largely on the testimony of a handwriting expert who said she had written the threatening ransom letters. No other physical evidence directly tied her to planning the kidnapping. In 1958, Catherine's lawyers filed an appeal. They charged that the FBI had suppressed evidence that could have helped her defense. A suppressed FBI report later revealed that another handwriting expert within the Bureau believed the letters might have been written by George, not Catherine. Rather than turn over its files, the FBI let the case lapse. Catherine Kelly walked out of prison at the age of 54. She returned to Oklahoma with her mother Ora and immediately began erasing her past. She changed her name back to her birth name, spelling it slightly differently, Lara Cleo Kelly. She found work as a bookkeeper at the Oklahoma County Poor Farm, which at that time operated as a hospital and nursing home. She lived on the premises as a virtual recluse. When reporters occasionally tracked her down, she refused to speak about her past. She never remarried, she never wrote a memoir, she never gave interviews. Ora Shannon, Catherine's mother, was institutionalized at the same Oklahoma County home and hospital where her daughter worked. The woman who had once rented rooms to criminals at $50 a night spent her final years as a patient in a nursing home. She died in 1980 at the age of 92. Catherine outlived her mother by 5 years. She died on May 28, 1985, at the age of 81. The cause of death was never publicly confirmed. Some sources suggest natural causes. Others hint at suicide or an overdose of sleeping pills. Whatever the truth, Catherine Kelly died as Lara Cleo Kelly, a quiet bookkeeper in Oklahoma. She was buried beside her mother at Tecumseh Cemetery near Oklahoma City, far from the flashbulbs and headlines that had once followed her every move. She had served her time. She had paid for the crime that made her famous. And she had spent her final 27 years trying to disappear. But perhaps the most unexpected story belongs to Pauline Fry, Catherine's daughter from her first marriage. Pauline was just 14 years old when her mother was arrested for kidnapping Charles Urschel. Before going to prison, Catherine deeded her Fort Worth home to her daughter. Pauline was sent to live with relatives while her mother and grandmother faced life sentences. What happened next would remain a secret for decades. Charles Urschel, the man Pauline's family had kidnapped, quietly arranged to pay for the girl's education. Working through intermediaries so Pauline would never know the source of the funds, the oil man ensured that the daughter of his kidnappers would have opportunities her family's crimes might have stolen from her. Urschel never spoke publicly about this act of generosity. He returned to his normal life after the kidnapping, running the Slick Urschel Oil Company and helping to found the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. He had testified at trial that his captors treated him with consideration during his 9 days of captivity. Perhaps that small mercy stayed with him. Perhaps he understood that Pauline was as much a victim as he was. Whatever his reasons, Charles Urschel died in San Antonio on September 26, 1970, the 37th anniversary of the day the Kellys were arrested in Memphis. He took his reasons for helping Pauline to his grave. The other conspirators in the Urschel kidnapping met various fates. Albert Bates, Kelly's partner in the actual abduction, was sent to Alcatraz along with Kelly and Harvey Bailey. Bates had been a career criminal since his youth. He had served time on Alcatraz decades earlier when it was a military prison, having been sent there for desertion from the Army in 1911. He died at Alcatraz on July 4, 1948, of heart failure. He was 54 years old. Harvey Bailey, the escaped bank robber, who happened to be at the Shannon Ranch when agents raided it, always maintained he had nothing to do with the kidnapping itself. Charles Urschel eventually came to believe him and lobbied for his release. Bailey was paroled in 1961, but was immediately rearrested by Kansas authorities who still wanted him for his 1933 prison escape. He was paroled from Kansas in 1965 and spent his final years as a cabinet maker in Joplin, Missouri. He died on March 1, 1979, at the age of 91. Boss Shannon, Catherine's stepfather, who had provided the ranch where Urschel was held, received a 25-year sentence. President Franklin Roosevelt pardoned him in 1944 due to ill health. He returned to Paradise, Texas, and lived quietly until his death on Christmas Day, 1956, at a hospital in Bridgeport. Before he died, Shannon performed one final act for the family. When no one claimed Machine Gun Kelly's body in 1954, Boss Shannon arranged for him to be buried in the family plot at Cottondale Cemetery. The man who had harbored the kidnapper also gave him his final resting place. Armand Shannon, Boss's son who had helped guard Urschel at his small shack on the ranch, received 10 years probation. He was the only member of the conspiracy to avoid prison time. His young wife Olitha had also been at the ranch during the kidnapping. The lives they built after the trial left little trace in the historical record. The legacy of Machine Gun Kelly is a study in contrasts. The legend Catherine created portrayed him as a ruthless killer, an expert machine gunner, a man to be feared. The reality was far more mundane. He was a failed insurance salesman, a mediocre bootlegger, a man who stumbled into major crime and proved to be remarkably bad at it. He left his machine gun in Texas when he fled to Memphis. He was arrested in his pajamas, hungover and helpless. His fellow inmates at Alcatraz mocked him as Pop Gun Kelly because his stories were so obviously exaggerated. But the consequences of his crimes were real. His first wife spent decades hiding from his name. His eldest son carried the scars of abuse until his death. His second wife spent half her adult life in prison. Her mother died in an institution. The people who helped him faced years behind bars. Even the man they kidnapped, Charles Urschel, spent the rest of his life connected to the crime, showing up at parole hearings and advocating for the release of those he believed were unjustly punished. The name Machine Gun Kelly became shorthand for the gangster era of the 1930s. Hollywood made movies about him. Writers published books. His mugshot joined those of Al Capone, John Dillinger, and Bonnie and Clyde in the gallery of American outlaws. But unlike those other criminals, Kelly's reputation was largely manufactured. Catherine created the monster. The FBI amplified it. And the family paid the price. George Ramsey Barnes Jr. died as a Trimbach, having successfully erased his father from his identity. Bruce Barnes died still defending the man who threw his brother across the room but doted on him. Geneva Ramsey outlived them all, a 95-year-old woman whose teenage marriage to a charming young man had led to decades of questions she refused to answer. Catherine Kelly died as Lyra Cleo Kelly, a bookkeeper in Oklahoma, her glamorous mugshots gathering dust in FBI files. And Pauline Fry, the innocent daughter, received an education funded by the man her family had kidnapped, a secret act of grace in a story otherwise defined by violence and consequences. Machine Gun Kelly's grave sits in a small country cemetery in Wise County, Texas, not far from the ranch where Charles Urschel was held in the summer of 1933. The headstone is modest. The name is misspelled. Few visitors come. The man who was once called the most dangerous criminal in America rests in obscurity, surrounded by the family of his second wife's stepfather, the only people willing to give him a place to be buried. The Thompson submachine gun that gave him his name was never his weapon of choice. He hated the noise it made. His wife bought it for him. She made him practice with it. She created the legend that would define him and destroy them both. In the end, Machine Gun Kelly was less a master criminal than a cautionary tale about the price of borrowed fame and the families left to pay for it. The Urschel kidnapping marked a turning point in American law enforcement. It was the first major case tried under the Lindbergh Law. It helped establish the FBI as a powerful federal agency. It gave J. Edgar Hoover the victory he needed to build his own legend. The term G-men, whether Kelly actually shouted it or not, entered the American vocabulary. The era of the celebrity gangster was reaching its peak, and the federal government was learning how to fight back. But for the Barnes family, and the Kellys, and the Shannons, there were no headlines about victory. There were only years of prison sentences, changed names, and the slow work of rebuilding lives shattered by one man's crimes. The sons who never spoke to each other about their father. The wife who spent 25 years behind bars for a crime she may not have planned. the mother who died in the same institution where her daughter worked as a bookkeeper, the stepdaughter whose education was secretly funded by the victim. Machine Gun Kelly died on his 59th birthday, alone in a prison cell, his heart giving out after 21 years behind bars. The family he left behind spent the rest of their lives dealing with what he had done. Some forgave him, some never did. Some disappeared into new identities. Some defended his memory until they died. All of them learned what it meant to be connected to one of America's most notorious criminals. The gangster era of the 1930s produced many famous names. Some died in shootouts with police. Others were executed or spent their lives in prison. But few stories illustrate the true cost of that era, better than the story of Machine Gun Kelly's family, the children who changed their names, the wife who erased her identity, the victim who secretly helped the kidnapper's daughter, the stepfather who buried the man no one else would claim. That same decade saw another family rise to even greater notoriety in the criminal underworld. Their operations stretched across Chicago and beyond. Their name became synonymous with organized crime itself. If you want to see what happened to the family of Al Capone after his empire crumbled, watch this video next.